Welcome, this is LG415, the Week 2 Lecture, covering Chapters 3 and 4. Again, this will be a very quick highlight of the most important things in Chapters 3 and 4 that you need to pay attention to and to at least understand the concepts as we move forward, and use a building block style to get you to a point where you can understand quality concepts a little easier. Excuse me. Beginning this week, in week 2, the work starts becoming a little more aggressive. There's more homework assignments, case studies, and the expectations of completion of the assignments and the correct format and meeting the requirements are going to start ramping up. As long as you start paying attention to the videos, especially from their homework reviews and other things, and you're following along and you're maintaining a steady progression, your skills will improve, your analytical abilities will improve, your critical thinking abilities will improve, your writing abilities will improve, and you'll start to see in yourself progression and development of skill sets that you're going to need to actually use this in a real world situation. So very quickly, the overview of week 2 is basically sitting right here. We're going to be doing some introductions, going over the PowerPoint slides. These are your learning outcomes that you're going to be expected to be able to articulate in both the homework assignments and the case studies. And these are going to be our relative chapters. Again, in the module, here are your, as I scroll down, here are your discussion section, homework, 2 case studies this week, and then your first exam. Okay, so let's go to right off the bat to our lecture. Oh, got the wrong one. Let's pull up week 3, chapter 3 especially. Chapter 3, if you recall from chapter 1 or week 1, we focus on the customer. That's where we have to drive all of our quality aspects towards, is the customer. And the importance of the customer is just like we said in week 1. Without the customers, you don't have a business, and the customer's not satisfied with your product, and they're not going to come back and visit you again, and they're going to determine that you're not going to have a quality product. Remembering that if you're dissatisfied with something, you're going to tell 10 people, they'll tell 10 people, they'll tell 10 people, and so it escalates exponentially. If you're satisfied with something, usually you only tell your close friends, relatives, and all that kind of stuff. So and then it kind of leaks out from there. But bad news travels more quickly than good news. So remember, customer focus, focusing on the customer requirements and the customer expectations is what quality is all about. That's why we have to satisfy the customer to meet or exceed their expectations. That's the goal. We want to meet or exceed what they're doing. We're not going to go over the ISO. If you are familiar with any kind of business-related courses or have done coursework, the ISO is the International Standard of Organizations. These are the excuse me. These are the 9000 series is basically the name for it, but then they have yearly inputs or bi-yearly input. Excuse me, every 2 years they usually ramp up and modify the ISO requirements. But these are the the industry standards that must be adhered to. They're a guide. They're not specific rules. They're a guide. They tell you how to achieve an ISO certification. As long as you're meeting specific requirements that are in there, the organization can become ISO certified. They're not specific guidelines. You must do this. You must do this. What they do is they give you a broad range of detail that you can tailor your business processes and how you conduct business to meet those requirements. Okay, they're just standards and recommendations that you have to meet in order to be ISO certified. Excuse me. We've already gone over key customer practices. Again, you can read these and provide and gain a lot out of it just through your own understanding. The biggest thing I do want to hone in on is this: the voice of the customer. If you, like I said in week 1, if you go for a Six Sigma certification or take green belt or black belt training, voice of the customer is the key, because the voice of the customer are their expectations and their requirements. You must listen to what they're saying in order to tailor your processes to meet the customer needs and expectations and standards, specifications, and that sort of thing. This is just going through more key factors about how organizations can change their culture to meet the customer requirement. Again, this is a good example. Basically, I would like to focus on this for just a second, just to give you some insight. uh, Lexus, I'm not worried about Park Place Lexus, but we're just talking about Lexus as a whole. Okay, Lexus is the luxury line produced by Toyota. Every Toyota engineer, every single one of them that comes into work for Toyota starts on the production line. That's where they spend the first year to 2 years. They learn how to build the product. That way they understand what the product is, and then they're integrated into the customer requirements, why we're doing it this way, why the process is going along, why the manufacturing plan is laid out in such a fashion. And as they move up and into the actual engineering or managerial processes, they're very familiar with what's going on the floor, but now they can relate customer requirements to what they did. Okay, Lexus insists that after their first 2 years on the floor learning how to build the car, they have to go out and do field work, do field research. So they go out and they spend another year or so sitting with the customers, actually driving in the sitting in the dealerships and driving with the customers and getting immediate feedback on the design features and the performance features of the automobile. That's where they spend the next year. So basically 3 years is spent either building the automobile, building the product, I should say, and reviewing through field testing and do field research. That way, when they start going back into the organization, they have a really good idea what's going on out in the actual world and what kind of parameters and expectations the customers have. So that's their own unique, and that's why it's called the Toyota production system, and it's kind of a model that everybody kind of generates. Very seldom with American manufacturers will you see an engineer at a dealership asking you to drive around and give feedback. That's what the survey forms are for. But for Lexus, they handle it a little bit differently. You won't see that too often in the States, but you will see it quite often in overseas markets. Okay, I just wanted to bring that to your attention to show you what Lexus does in order to get customer feedback, to understand how their product is designed, manufactured, how it performs, and what those engineers are required to do. Again, we're going to go over customer satisfaction. The biggest thing here is 65% of business is from existing customers. Okay, so once you make customers happy and they're meeting their requirements, they're usually going to come back. Okay, this is from I believe 2011 or 2012. I can't remember exactly what those numbers were. So they're a little bit dated. So, but it's maintained around 65% for a long period of time. If you're above 65% in customer satisfaction, you're doing really well. Okay, and like it says here, businesses with a 98% customer retention rate maintains profits for a long time. Okay, so the higher you can generate customer satisfaction based on quality product, quality assessments, making sure you're meeting their needs and their expectations, the more profitable you're going to become and the better your product can become, because you can continue on to improve it. Or you can change it. If it's not meeting standards, you can go back and change it to where it does. We've talked about customer engagement, about loyalty, and willing to make efforts to do business within the organization. Basically, that's how we focus on the customer. This is what we call a market segment. Okay, we're going to separate the market out into segments based on demographic, and we're going to figure out exactly how our product applies to those segments, and we're going to see what we can do to improve our customer engagement in each of those segments to garner more of the market share and to generate customer retention, satisfaction, and loyalty. ASCII, well, this is just a polling agency, for lack of a better term. They go out there and this I'm going to highlight this and let you know what that is, but it is a customer satisfaction index. This is where all the data is gathered to where everybody can go out there and see how they're doing against not only how they're doing, but how they compare against competitors. The American Society for Quality is a governing body for quality information and certification of green belt, of Lean Six Sigma, green belt, black belt, and master black belt levels. If you want to know more about ASQ, simply Google that, and there's a website, a plethora of information out there, and you can find out what the requirements are and the knowledge base you have to have, what they call the body of knowledge, to even sit in and actually get your training, do the experience, and submit for national certification through ASQ. And ASQ, like I said, is the national certification body for all Lean Six Sigma practitioners, either at the green belt level, the black belt level, or the master black belt level, which we're going to get into in another week or so, I believe. But those are just levels. Green belt means basically you're at the beginning stage. You're out of boot camp, let's say, and you're out there doing things through your tech schools and things like that. Black belt means that you've gone to advanced schooling, you've gotten more advanced information and training, and of course, the master black belt is the pinnacle of Lean Six Sigma certifications. I'm a certified as the developer of the course. I am a certified Lean Six Sigma master black belt. I've got several years of experience, several years of training, and I've been certified as a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, going through all those requirements to achieve that level. And it's a stepping stone. Okay, the more experience you have, the more training you have, the better off you're going to be, and that's what ASQ does for you. Identifying customers, again, we're talking about customer segments. We have to identify who are the consumers. We've already identified those in week 1. We have consumers who are ultimate end users of the product. We have internal customers, where we have customers internal to the organization that receive our products, and then they do something with it, and then those follow-on people do something with it. And of course, the external customers are basically business to business or the consumer. Okay, it really doesn't matter. Anything outside of the organization that uses our product is an external customer. But we focus really on the consumer because they're the ones who are actually buying our products. Some of our external customers will as well, but we're focused in on the customer, the consumer, that's going to really drive our product up, because that's the open market. Okay. Basically, customer supplier model. This is Business 101. This is part of your discussion questions with the market segment. Here we have segmentation with demographics, geography, volumes, vital few, useful many. Basically, the vital few are the few key indicators that we're trying to target, or the demographic specifically that we're trying to target. The useful many is everything else that's out there. But within a market segment, we're trying to do exactly that. We're trying to segment the market up by demographics, age, education, income levels, that kind of thing. Geography is just where they're located. How many people are out there, how many folks are in that specific grouping, and then we start looking at those groups individually to see exactly what they're looking for. That's the vital few. So, and market segments are different. So people with lower income levels are looking for value for their dollar. Okay, so that's what we're trying to target, value for dollar. And those who are in the higher income levels are looking for aesthetics, looking for the fit, function, how slick does it look, right? Some of the amenities that are in there, some of the add-on features that some in the lower levels will probably not are looking at, but maybe not necessarily can afford. They would like to have them as long as it doesn't cost them a whole lot of money. So those are two different customer segmentations that we're trying to focus in on, and that's why we have so many different models and variety of options for all kinds of automobiles and products, because it all depends. Whichever person is looking at it, that's the kind of thing I want. I'm willing to spend that money for it, and that's why we're targeting within that specific segment those specific options and features that they're looking for. So that's customer segmentation. Net present value of customer. This is all financial type stuff. Net present value is looking for profit potential. Okay, if you've taken a finance course, or if you're going to take a finance course, or any kind of accounting, you'll know what net present value is. It's basically what value that the customer holds at this point. Okay, so it's revenues minus customer expenses, and that's your net present value, and that's basically what they're willing to spend to get a specific product. Okay, so that's basically what you're targeting at a market segment. Product quality dimensions, these are the things that customers are looking for and what we're trying to appease. Okay, what we're trying to meet through our service or our manufacturing processes. And these are all different levels. Everybody has their own how they look at these individually. Aesthetics is usually a key indicator on some things, and then they start looking at the rest of these. Okay, so it's usually features and aesthetics that you're usually looking at. Reliability, you kind of assume, but then again, you may want to look at it from another standpoint. But reliability is nothing more than the product being able to function under the conditions it's designed for. Okay, so basically, automobiles are supposed to function in all kinds of weather, in all kinds of areas. If it doesn't, then it's not reliable. So if it doesn't start when you expect it to start, that's not reliable. Okay, that's reliability. And we're going to get into that a little bit later as well. Against the performance, the table for performance dimension. Okay, these are just kind of like an example to kind of get you zeroed in on what we're talking about with the dimension and the products that, or the features that are offered and what we're trying to satisfy the customer with. Okay, so let's look at reliability. Mean time to failure. This is what this means is mean time is the average. So the average time to where the product fails to do what it's supposed to do. Okay, so that's reliability. So we have a finite life cycle for a product that can go so far before it starts to fail. Okay, or it does fail. And so what we do is we do these statements on time every month. So if we're receiving statements saying, hey, listen, you need to come in and do modifications on your car or do servicing on your car, this way we extend this life to its ultimate failure time. That's why you have 3,000 miles, change your oil, rotate your tires, that kind of thing. All that stuff in the back of your owner's manual that you probably don't read. You need to look at that because that enhances and maintains your reliability and durability of the product that you're using. Maintaining those maintenance cycles helps extend the life of whatever you're operating. So that's why and these are just metrics or measures we use to determine how far out you need to do those, to do your preventative maintenance cycles, and to maintain the product that you're using for as long and make it useful for as long as it possibly can. Dimensions of quality, again, reliability, assurance. It's pretty simple to understand. The tangibles are the physical touch things. Okay, tangibles is something you could touch, feel, and see and smell. So those affect the five senses. So we're looking at this from a tangible standpoint. Is it tangible to me, or is it not tangible to me? So if I'm striking those five senses in a way that makes you want to get the product, that way you would determine that tangibles are an important part of your quality assessment. Then I'm meeting the requirement. Okay, and if I'm not, maybe I need to find out what it would entice you to buy the product, and I can make changes to my product line to meet that need. Classifying customer needs. I think you can all get what's out of there. The Kano model is basically a level of how things are must-haves or dissatisfiers that are expected that cause dissatisfaction if they're not there. So if you're looking for power windows, power steering, power brakes, and they're not there, you're dissatisfied because you're expecting those. Okay, and some automobiles, basically all that stuff is standard equipment nowadays, but there are some models out there that don't offer power windows. You may have to use the old crank thing, but the power steering and power brakes are usually standard. Okay, in fact, I believe it's an industry requirement now that they have those on there, but power windows are not. Power windows are just those options. Okay, some have it, some don't, but you might have a dissatisfier in there. Okay, and this is part of your discussion question. I believe it's part of your homework assignment, to where we have to identify what these are and determine how realistic they are to determining what quality is and what we can do within our processes to make sure we meet those needs. So wants are satisfiers, and exciters are things that are unexpected. Okay, ooh, I didn't know that was there. That's pretty cool. That kind of thing. So if you go into a dealer and you buy a car and they got all the bells and whistles, and you sit down and you find out it has a power or heated seats and cooled seats, right? That's unexpected. You really weren't expecting it, but it's there. So that's an exciter, something that's there that you weren't expecting, that you think is getting good value for, that's added into the price that you think is more than satisfactory enough to meet your need and meet your price considerations. But that's something that just is unexpected and you like it. Okay, again, voice of the customer, we've talked about that. It's just nothing more than what the customer wants, needs, wishes, and specifications. And we have all these different ways of gathering data on the customer: focus groups, complaints, which we always hear about, surveys, which always come with every product you buy, and probably nobody reads them or fills them out. I do, because I like to let them know how I feel about things. So you may want to do that, fill them out. Analyzing voice of the customer, we can use an affinity diagram, which is nothing more than putting things into categories, and we can actually use the Kano model here: dissatisfiers, satisfiers, and exciters. We can also put those in there, or we can put them into any kind of category that we're looking for. So if we've got a lot of data and we're looking for demographic, we can put these into demographics, age groupings, income groupings, education groupings, geographical area groupings, things like that. And we can start listing all of the requirements of these customers under these specific categories in order to assess what they're wanting. And we can actually look at it from a standpoint of how many wanted a specific feature, and that now becomes a priority for us to address underneath that category. Here's an example of an affinity diagram. We have these three large buckets that we have, and then we're looking underneath all the individual requirements under a loan product. All right, which one of these may be the most impactful driver to make our loan products more efficient and more accessible and easier to do? It might be diversity. Okay, so if this is a high level area that's impacting our loan products, we can elevate this up to a high priority and start looking at how we can make our programs more diverse and more accessible and easier for the consumer. And that's what an affinity diagram does for you. Gap models are just that. In a very simple, short way, gap is what the customers are expecting and what we're producing. So that's a gap. So what they want and what we're producing is a gap. So we're trying to figure out how to fill that gap, how to close that gap with features and other things to make our product more quality driven for the customer. So that's a gap analysis or a gap model. The rest of this is fairly easy to understand. Organizational focus, moments of truth, right? This is basically how we get that aha feeling or that doggone it feeling, right? So either we're excited, delighted, or disappointed. Customer reaction and customer requirements, we've already talked about with the voice of the customer. Complaints, we all know about that. Anybody who's dissatisfied always voices a complaint very emphatically. So we have to address those, and we have to make sure that we assess the information and treat the customer with respect. However, I do want to throw this out there that the old adage that the customer is always right doesn't necessarily mean that, because the customers could be overly demanding. Okay, they may want something that you can't produce or can't do regardless of what you're trying to do. So they may not necessarily be right, but we can take their information and look at what we're doing and see if we can't modify things to make some of those not as egregious, or make the negative impact of those factors less negative, so that they're not constantly coming in with the same complaints. We can address those and alleviate them as much as we possibly can. But this is just a methodology to address customer complaints in a way that makes them feel important, and that their input into your process is exactly what, because that's what you want. You want them to have input into your process, because if you don't know what's wrong, you can't fix it. Just a slight little model here. Manager customer relationships, I think you can understand that. Engagement, we talked about. Designing satisfaction surveys. This might be something that you're going to do at some point, is to design a survey. If you've taken test and measurements or any kind of analytical course that tells you how to do this, this course is not designed to do this, but basically you can design a survey to garner information about your products and services and gauge those against a scale called a Likert scale. That's on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 to 10, that kind of thing. I'm sure you've seen those in surveys. And so we can take that qualifying data. Okay, qualification is basically how you feel about things. We can take qualitative data and convert it into quantitative data, which are numbers by using the Likert scale, so we can measure just how much you really like the product or how much you really don't like the product, okay, or service. So that's what a satisfaction survey does and how you can actually do it. These are just the basic elements of how you can develop a survey for your service or product if you need one. And here's a Likert scale. Okay, you've seen these before, and that's what we're talking about earlier, about how we can take qualitative data, how you feel about something, and put it into quantitative measures by adding a number to it. Performance comparisons, again, I think you can understand that. Let's go measuring. All this stuff is fairly easy to understand, so we're not going to dwell on this too much. I do want to focus on that customer perceived value, and that's what's driving your quality levels and your satisfaction surveys, how customer perceives value of your service or product. That's what drives whether or not you're going to maintain contact and loyalty with customers and generate revenue. This is very important. Remember, the whole topic of quality is customer focused, customer perceived value. So let's move into chapter 4 real quick. Workforce focus. This is how we're developing our workforce and our organizational culture. Okay, anybody who's actively involved in accomplishing the work is part of the workforce. That's from the janitor, because they're helping keep things clean so you can do your work better, all the way up to the shipping guy, shipping and receiving. Okay, that's everybody in between: finance, engineering, human resources, all your trade skills. Anybody who's involved in developing or providing the service or product is part of your workforce. There is an ISO standard for that, and you can read these to see what's involved in that. Performance excellence, okay, focus practices to generate performance within the workforce, and how we can generate a better quality and more consistent quality within the workforce. Okay, these are just examples of that, which we're not going to go over. Evolution, we're not really going to go over that as well, but you can read it. Workforce management is nothing more than human resources management now. That's what HRM stands for. So that's a separate part of the functional area of the business. But this is what they do to help maintain your workforce at a high level. At least that's what hopefully they're supposed to be doing. Okay, strategic HR is nothing more than targeting specific elements that you're looking for: skill sets, knowledge, and that kind of thing, to fit voids or to better balance your workforce, to make sure you have expertise out there in specific areas that need to be there. High performing work cultures is nothing more based on performance and high value or high performance work. That means quality every time, consistency, workflow. We're doing flexibility, innovation. These are like your alternate work schedules, innovation within the production lines or whatever you're doing. That way you're not doing robotics and things like that. There still have to have people to run the robotics. So robots may replace specific types of work, but you still have to have technicians in there to run the robots. So that's innovation, getting knowledge and skill sharing up to where people who used to work on a line can now be trained to run the robot. Okay, so that's just skill progression. Or you may want to go out there and hire people in to train your guys, or hire people out there who have similar skill sets to put them in there as an expert so they can mentor and train other people. So that's what high performance and performance work is all about. Conditions of collaboration within a work culture. These are all very important to develop an overall non-threatening but inclusive work culture among everybody in the workforce from the top down. Okay, first one is respect. Everybody has to be respected. The aligned values means everybody knows what the values and goals that they're shooting for, and everybody's focused in on that. That's aligned values. Everybody shares the cultural values and expectations of the organization. They have a shared purpose to achieve a goal. They communicate well, and they trust each other. Okay, very hard to do, but this is part of a high performance work culture, and you see that more developing over the last 15-20 years than you have in the past. This is very important, and if you're ever, even in your own organization now, you can gauge these and see how well you're performing with a high performance organization. Engagement. is just nothing more than getting workforce to engage and buy into the system. That's what we're looking for here is buy-in. Okay, as long as people are buying into what you're telling them, you're going to get better results out of it. Okay, and that encompasses a lot of things: philosophy, sociology, and all kinds of things that to generate a workforce or a work culture that promotes individualism, promotes empowerment, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but actually gets people to buy into the system because they realize that if they're part of the system, then they're going to share in the successes. If they're separated, then they're out there on their own. They really don't know what their focus is, what they're supposed to be doing, how their work relates to the overall end product, and that is a dysfunctional organization. So we have to get everybody in there, everybody included, everybody understands what they're doing, what their role is, into the final output of a product. That way we have buy-in and we have empowerment and we have employee ownership into the processes and products that we're producing or services. These are just a breakdown of the factors. You can read those. Advantages to the workforce engagement: the more ingrained and accommodating you are within the workforce, the better off the workforce is going to perform, and the better products you're going to produce, the more consistently you're going to produce. And those are basically the advantages of the workforce engagement, even though they break it down a little bit more than I did. Okay, drivers of workforce engagement, you can read those. Employee involvement, EI or empowerment is what we're coming up next. This is how we get people to work, motivate. Okay, we want to make sure that they feel important. Okay, and that they have a need, and the needs that that employees have is to feel part of the team. So remember Maslow's hierarchy from psychology, sociology, and other disciplines, where Maslow's hierarchy is basically the foundation for motivation and for getting a high performance organization. If you're down there on the bottom, you're starting out, you're basically out there on your own, but we have to mentor you, we have to coach you, we have to get you involved, we have to get you buy-in, we have to make sure that you can do the job that you're supposed to do in order for you to feel important, and that your actions are very important to the output of the organization and to the success of the organization. And plus we can motivate you in all kinds of ways: promotions, bonuses, skill training, things like that, to improve what you're doing, to improve the employee, to get better results from that position. That's all motivation. Again, motivation theory and some of the types of theory that you need. And there's Maslow right there at the top, the hierarchy of needs. Okay, that's usually the baseline for all organizations to follow. Here's how we can design a high performance work system. Okay, we make sure that we have work and job design specifically for tasks and skill levels, and we can train to those tasks and skill levels. Empowerment, there's a question in your discussion about what empowerment is. Empowerment is just nothing more than allowing the lowest level of employee to make decisions within their scope of responsibility, not beyond it, but within their scope. We want to make sure that employees have the power to make changes, to suggest changes, to implement certain things, and to try things that don't directly cause issues with the processes in place. In other words, I don't want some, let's say, I don't want a high schooler, okay, performing brain surgery. Okay, they don't have the skill sets, they don't have the experience, but they can, in fact, impact the process with ideas on how to get to being a brain surgeon. They might have a different level of expertise, or maybe some knowledge or some nugget that they think might work in order to advance people to get to that next highest level or beyond. So no idea is off bounds, as long as what they're saying is important and it plays a role in improving the processes and making sure we're doing things better and more reliably. Okay, so that's empowerment, making sure that the lowest level folks have a voice, and that we listen to that voice and their ideas, and that they can get buy-in, and that they can change things that they see. If they need to be done, they can go ahead and do it. And if it works, fine. If it doesn't, no sweat. We can go back in there and look at it, see where maybe the thought might be a little bit of awry. Maybe we can use that and tweak it and get better results out of it. That's empowerment. The rest of this I think y'all can understand, because there's going to be a load of slides after this that do it. We've already talked about work design and job design. Enticing or enhancing work design is just part of the elements to make our processes and jobs better. Here's the empowerment piece, and how successful empowerment can really propel an organization forward at light speed and get a lot of people on the lower end and even in the middle a piece of the action, get their buy-in. Skin in the game is one of those adages that we use, but we want them to have buy-in to the process and feel that they're important no matter what their role is. Team building, we have all kinds of teams out there, so we need to develop teams and unification. That way everybody's driving for the same goal. Skill team requirements, right? We want to make sure we have certain skill sets when we're developing teams, and how we can manage conflict, lead the team, decision making, communication, all that kind of good stuff. We want to make sure that our teams have this mix of training and skill sets to make the team better. Okay, you got to have something. If you don't know how to do conflict management and resolution, you better have somebody in there who can do it, because they're invaluable to keeping the team together and having them perform at a high level. Again, a development process is here. Life cycle. I'm sure you all heard the life cycle of the team development: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Forming is when everybody gets together. Storming is where everybody is probably at each other's throats, beating each other up. But that lays the groundwork for everybody to understand where everybody's coming from. The norming is when we all gather together and we start focusing on the specific issues that the team was designed or brought together for, to start focusing on those issues. Performing is when we start gelling together, everybody's working as one or in concert with each other. However, the storming is always going to be in here somewhere. There's always going to be disagreements, but you have protocols in there or procedures to eliminate that through conflict resolution and just airing things out and discussing them and coming to a consensus. And by the way, consensus does not mean that 100% of everybody agrees. It just means that we can all agree on that this is where we need to go, even though you have some dissenters out there who may not think that that's the best way, but they're willing to go and try it and see what happens. That's consensus. Okay. Adjourning is afterwards. You have a party, pizza party, after the project is done or the team has fulfilled its function, and so they adjourn and they go about their separate ways. But the adjourning part is when we assess how we've done things, what we were assigned to do, what the output of that assignment was, how well we did it, lessons learned from it, what not to do in the future if we're on a team, what to avoid, best practices, what we found out worked well that we can replicate in future events, things like that. That's where the adjourning comes into play, and we basically do a team assessment on how well we did. Okay. Successful teams, this pretty much defines everything. Workplace environment, these are basically three things we're all looking for in a productive work environment: health, safety, and overall well-being aspects. I think that's pretty much self-explanatory, and it's explained in the text. Learning and development, which is part of our in-process training. Compensation and recognition. People always like to be compensated and always like to be recognized. Okay, that's a motivator. That's what keeps people striving and moving forward. Okay, whether it's monetary or informal through a handshake or just an attaboy kind of thing, or whether it's individual or group setting. So there's all kinds of ways to keep the motivation going and to show that their input and their performance and their contribution to the process and the product is appreciated, and any extraordinary effort that they do to make it so they can be recognized. Or even if it's not extraordinary, maybe they just came together as a group to form something and to find a very small problem, you can recognize the group, because if they hadn't done what they did, we wouldn't be able to advance this process forward. Okay, and you can give kudos to those guys, and you give kudos to the high performers and even to the low performers. Even if they didn't really do much, at least they contributed ideas and other things that you can recognize. Okay. Recognition and strategies, performance management. Again, this is nothing more on using performance metrics to see how well you're doing, right? Where we need to be, what the customer expects, what those gaps are, and figuring out how we can appraise the system and assess the system to where we can make the tweaks and process improvements to advance and get better within our processes. Assessing workforce outcome measures. This is how we do overall. It basically is performance level. Okay. Assessing workforce process measures, good selection there, explanation, I should say, of what we can use to measure processes, which we're going to get into in later chapters. Workforce engagement, that kind of thing. We use surveys, inputs. I believe the government uses, I can't remember exactly the term right off the top of my head, but it's a satisfaction survey or an environment survey. That's what it's called. It's an environment survey that they ask you to fill out on how well you feel about the overall organization, and then going down to the supervisor level. So they're getting a wide swath of information to see how well you're performing and how well the workforce is engaged and how well they're performing, as well as the organization. Sustaining high performance work, this is basically what we're looking at. Again, we're going to get into this in detail in a couple of these areas. Most of these are outside the scope of what the book and what this course is for, especially for HR and career progression and succession planning. These are just letting you know that this is part of the overall process to sustain a high performance work system. That's what's required. Capability and capacity, these are the two differences. Capability is the ability to accomplish something. Capacity is how much can we produce. We're going to get into that as well a little bit later on in the course. The capability and capacity part as part of a process vice workforce, but they're both basically the same. Hiring practices is HR type stuff. You can read this and try to get a grasp on it. And of course, succession planning in a nutshell. Succession planning is preparing for the future. How are we going to get people into the pipeline to train, educate, mentor, develop skill sets, that way they can achieve a higher level of responsibility, especially as those people start leaving the workforce. We have to replace those somehow. We don't want to always recruit external to the organization, because we have a lot of knowledge internal already. We just have to develop it. So basically, this is a process to help groom and get future leaders and managers and supervisors into the pipeline to where we can develop skill sets and that kind of thing, so they can elevate themselves or move into higher level positions of management, supervisory type positions. That way we keep the information of the organization and all those skills and all that knowledge and all that experience within the organization without having to hire external. Okay, hiring external does cause some issues, because they have to get acquainted with our internal processes and the organizational culture, where we have people inside already who have that. We just have to get them progressing to a higher level. Okay, so that pretty much ends lecture 2. Hopefully I didn't go along too long or bore you to death. Like I'm saying, I'm just hitting the highlights here. So hopefully you're getting something out of this to where you can get a nice broad view of an organization and what's involved in building a high performance organization, high performing teams, high performing processes. Okay, and that ends the lecture. Thank you very much.